Former UKIP leader and, of course, good friend to LBC, and you often hear him on LBC, Nigel Farage, who's joined me in the studio. Mr Farage, welcome to the programme. It was a very dark day. How do you reflect on what we've seen in Berlin?
Yeah, you didn't mention Zurich, did you? There was a shooting in a mosque in Zurich. There was a gunman arrested on the loose in Brussels last night. So there's a lot of this. You know, whenever these terrible things happen, the response is, well, of course, it's no one's fault. No one's responsible. These things just happen. I'm sorry, and I know that I'll be condemned for it. But I think really in the case of Germany, we ought to be a little bit more straightforward. The facts as we know them is that it's a 23-year-old from Pakistan who came into Germany this February.
And was known to police for minor crimes.
Was already known.
Drugs
I mean, you know, and I have to say, I'm not even sure why somebody from Pakistan qualifies as a refugee, as opposed to being more of an economic migrant. But let's be honest about this. You know, Mrs. Merkel made one of the worst policy decisions we've seen from a European politician in the last 70 years, when she unconditionally said in the middle of 2015, as many as want to come, can come. And there was no vetting, there was no checking, and there were people like me standing up for months ahead of that, saying we should not let our compassion imperil our safety and indeed our civilization. And I think, frankly, people like Mrs. Merkel ought to take responsibility for what's happened. Look, there are some awful things happening all over the world. Do you know, according to the UNHCR, there are 60 million people currently displaced by wars, civil wars. You know, I'm not being utterly cold-hearted about this. There are problems, and let's face it, this country, of course, has put more money into relief aid than anybody else, and I'm all for doing those kind of things, Nick. And indeed, I was the first person to argue in British politics that we should take some refugees from Syria. And in particular, I pinpointed the Christians, who were literally being persecuted and murdered for who they were and what they believed in. So I'm not against, you know, opening up our hearts and taking some refugees, but goodness me, we have to vet incredibly carefully. But it is time people started to take responsibility for what's happened. Mrs. Merkel has directly caused a whole number of social and terrorist problems in Germany. It's about time we confronted that truth.
But she wasn't behind this 23-year-old man from Pakistan hijacking, killing the lorry driver and driving through the market.
Well, she supports Schengen as well, doesn't she? So he, you know,
it would appear he took the truck in Poland.
Well, fine. Well, exactly. There we are. There's the point. You see, these leaders of Europe support Schengen. They support the total free movement of people without borders. And the free movement of people doesn't just mean the free movement of good people. It means the free movement of bad people as well.
But what is the link between Brexit and the success of Donald Trump? Is it the populism that people have seen, that there is a concern? No, I'll let you...
this is not the BBC, is it? Because,
no,
you see, now the BBC say that anybody that opposes people like Mrs. Merkel and open borders, we're all to have this pejorative term, populist, dumped on our heads. We're not populists, we're realists. You know, we want change. We want a different world. I will say this to you, that Donald Trump and his team saw Brexit as the inspiration. And that's the reason they put me on a platform with him in Mississippi back in August.
And when they asked you, how did you do it, Nigel? What did you say to them? Because they must have said, what was the trigger? What was the key?
By incentivising the little people. By getting those people who had not voted, in some cases ever in their lives, to realise this was a chance to go out, to say what you think, where you really could change things. And that was the message of Brexit. So that was the message for Team Trump, was, you know, putting me on a platform in Mississippi to say, we did it. The pollsters were wrong, the pundits were wrong, the international community was wrong, the financial markets were wrong, the bookmakers were wrong, but don't let any of this depress you. Just get that message up. I think it isn't Trump that threatens the future of NATO, it's Mr. Juncker and the European Union. And I cannot imagine why Boris Johnson, Theresa May and the British government say they're neutral about the creation of a European army. They should be warning very loudly that NATO needs to be redefined, that people need to pay their way, but NATO actually has stood the test of time. And if the European army is anything like as successful as its currency or its fisheries policy or anything else, it's the wrong way to be going.
How many of Mrs. May's cabinet have reached out to you covertly or through emissaries?
Well, they're banned.
They've not even tried?
Can't talk to a chap like me. Goodness gracious me. I mean, I only know the future president of America and most of his team. I mean, I could actually be of help to the country in terms of us putting together quickly, you know, a trade relationship with America that isn't just good for jobs and investment in this country, but actually significantly strengthens Mrs. May's hand in terms of the renegotiation in Brussels. But, you know, I'm afraid we have this tribal party politics in this country that says, oh, no, he's UKIP, we can't talk to him. It is petty, backward, and very small-minded, and you know, one or two people have reached out to me, but they have to do it, as you say.
So some cabinet ministers have?
Yeah, but some might have.
How many?
So I can't remember, honestly. But I think there is a distinct lack of leadership at the moment, and you've got cabinet ministers every single week contradicting each other. I don't want to know our negotiating strategy. That's asking for too much and wouldn't make sense. But can we please have some agreement on where we're trying to get to? They want to fudge this. They want to water it down. They want us to finish up a bit like Norway, where whilst we've left the political union, we're still tied into most of the regulation. And I firmly, you know, reiterate that is not what we voted for. If we are betrayed by this group of politicians, and the jury's out, but if we're betrayed by them, then I think in 2020, at the next general election, you may well see political change in this country far greater than the shock we got back in June of this year.
Always good to have you come through the door, Nigel Farage. Thank you.